the new things that are coming from the government, and they're boots on the ground and they're having these discussions every day. So um, with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Jason, Charlie, and Bob to run through just a quick intros and then dive right into the content. So thank you everybody for joining. We will and another housekeeping item, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you guys have questions throughout, throw them in the chat and we'll save some time, a couple minutes at the end. We'll run through some questions. So with that, I don't know, Jason, do you want to do a real quick intro for yourself and the team?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks so much. We greatly appreciate being here. We've enjoyed the conversations and with Guide, and see quite a few in the future. I'm blessed today. I got our A team with us. We've got Bob Duffy, who's our Chief Operations Officer, and Charlie Shudo, who's our CTO and CSO. So yeah, we really want to get into the details today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, where we're at today, a couple real world examples, and then we're going to get into the process that we know delivers success. So yeah, questions are welcome, and I'm going to let Bob and Charlie do what they do. And Bob, I'll turn it over to you first, sir.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Josh and Sharon, for having us here. Thank you, Guide Technologies, and thank you everyone for taking some time in the middle of the day to talk about cybersecurity compliance. Hopefully, you've already had lunch and we're not standing between you and a meal. But kidding aside, we are here to talk about a pretty serious topic, CMMC. I would expect if you're attending this webinar that you've at least heard of it. It stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. What it is, it's a set of requirements that have long since been in place, but are now starting to be enforced. And it has to deal with the type of information that is present within Department of Defense contracts at various levels. Could be at a minimal level, federal contract information, could be at a more serious level, controlled unclassified information, and then you get up into the more advanced secret, top secret, classified, etc. What we're going to talk a lot today about is CMMC and especially levels 1 and 2. So a couple key takeaways. Number one, it is already live. This is not a future thing. This is a current thing that, as you can see on the screen, really took shape and entered law via 2 final rules over the last couple years. The first, without getting too into the weeds, was a Title 32 final rule. This cemented the program requirements, what they are, what they mean, who needs to meet them. The second one that just took effect this past November, Title 48 rule, dealt with the enforcement, how and when the CMMC requirements were going to flow into government contracts and subcontracts. So they flow down. You don't just have to be the big boys that are dealing direct with the DoD. If you are a supplier, if you're a manufacturer, engineering company, etc., even operating 4, 5, 15 rungs down the supply chain ladder, these requirements still apply to you if that protected information flows down through the work of that program. So with CMMC being live right now, here's where we are. The Title 32 rule laid out a phased implementation plan. It started in November of 2025 with phase 1 that is requiring self-assessments on select new contracts. What does this mean? It means you need to go out to the Defense Department's Supplier Performance Risk System, or SPRS, and submit a scored self-assessment to these requirements. That could be level 1, which is 15 requirements and 59 underlying objectives, or it could be level 2, that is 110 requirements with 320 underlying objectives. Only by submitting those self-assessments and being able to attest to each and every individual requirement and meeting all of them are you allowed to proceed with certification and then be awarded a contract. So the big difference now that the CMMC switch has flipped and the program is live is that it is foundational to the acquisition process. This is not a we can figure it out later. You want to bid on something new, self-assessments are required right now in phase one. Phase two will start to bring in C3PAO assessments. I promise you, I'm not making that acronym up. It stands for Certified Third Party Assessor Organizations. These are going to be involved at level two. It's an independent organization that is going to come in and conduct an assessment to measure your compliance with each and every one of those 110 requirements, 320 underlying objectives. Phase two kicks off just over 6 months from now in November of 2026. And it will mean going forward from that date, you have to have a C3PAO assessment and certification in order to bid on new contracts. Phase three starts a year from then, November 10th of 2027. This is when the option periods on existing contracts will start to be phased in. A lot of folks will look at this slide and think, okay, we're okay until November of 2027. Maybe if you don't plan on participating in any new awards, being awarded any new purchase orders or task orders, or if your prime contractor that you may work with isn't reaching out to you and saying, hey, we want to make sure you're certified by X date, which many primes are now starting to take such action as they look to get their supply chains in order to ensure that they're able to meet the requirements as they bid on new opportunities. And then lastly, phase four. This is when all contracts are going to have the CMMC requirements at the appropriate level phased in. That is November 10th of 2028. But wait, there's more. With the Title 48 rule that came out last November, the DoD added a caveat that our lawyer has deemed Russian roulette. And it essentially said that the program officer has full discretion to implement the CMMC requirements under any program in any contract or option prior to that November 28th deadline. In other words, here is the planned phased rollout until it isn't. We have seen one example already from one of our clients where an existing contract had the CMMC language entered into it before that phase three, when you might expect those existing contracts to take action with this. So it's something you need to have your legal team looking for. Where might I have these contract clauses? Where might I have exposure? And then also engaging with your prime contractors to ensure you understand the timeline so you can prepare your organization accordingly. So, where are we with organizations preparing for and meeting these requirements? This information is updated as of last night by the Cyber Accreditation Body, or the Cyber AB. They host a monthly town hall. It's the last Tuesday of every month. As of now, we are aware of just over 40 contracts already containing the CMMC language. That number is growing. There's about 1,200 organizations that have already achieved CMMC Level 2 certification. If I may humbly brag for a moment, SSE is one of those. But that only represents about 1.5% of the 80,000 companies that are expected to need CMMC Level 2 certification. So really all that we're seeing thus far get certified are those early adopters. There's another 160 or so that are either conditional or in progress. But here's the big number. There's only 103 certified third-party assessor organizations, C3PAOs. So you can do the math. 80,000 companies need to get certified. There's only 100 right now organizations that are able to do those certification assessments. Hence the planned phase rollout, but also what we're seeing right now is some chaos in scheduling, engaging with the C3PAO, and planning for that certification timeline. There are a lot of C3PAO applications in the queue that the Cyber AB is working through, as well as about 400 registered provider organizations. Those are organizations like ours that can assist companies with preparing for and eventually achieving their certification. I touched on a little bit of this, but just a visual for you. CMMC level 2, I mentioned 110 controls, 320 objectives. So these are weighted in terms of a score. Some are worth 1 point, some are worth 3 points, some are worth 5 points. And how the scoring system works, you start with a perfect score of 110, and then you subtract points for any requirements that are not fully met. Again, not fully met. That's key. So say that a particular requirement has 5 underlying objectives. You're meeting 4 of them, but 1 is not met. That control is deemed partially met. You do not get credit for the points in your scoring. Also, as the switch is flipped to CMMC, you cannot carry forward any unmet requirements that are worth 3 points or 5 points through the certification process. So previously, until CMMC went live, you could have unmet requirements so long as you had the documentation and POAMs, plans of action and milestones, that you were working towards to remediate them. That is no longer the case. CMMC is strictly pass fail, and it is all or nothing when it comes to meeting these requirements. Organizations that have not yet looked at themselves through the CMMC lens and are still relying on past assessments to NIST 800-171, even though they're the same requirements, how those assessments are going to be accepted by DoD moving forward has changed with CMMC going live. Little bit of color for you on perception and reality. Over the last 4+ years, we have conducted over 60 gap assessments. That's when Charlie and his team will come in and do a deep dive, get under the hood, document an organization's compliance status and readiness for CMMC certification down to the objective level. We found that on average, the score of those companies has been a -86. But what's more alarming is when those organizations had already self-assessed, we found on average a discrepancy of 134 points to the negative. So somebody that thought they might be at a 110 could actually be at a -24. And that varies throughout. A lot of it comes down to policy and procedure documentation or having things partially met, not fully met, and not an accurate score that reflects that status. Jason, do you want to share a little bit about some specific client examples and what conversations you're having now in the real world?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Bob. So this is a very real world example. This is a client that we're working with today. So I just want to go through a little bit of their history and what they've faced over the last 18 months to 24 months. They started in June of 2024 and they spent $12,000 for a CMC coach. That was step one to get off on what they called the right foot. After that, they spent a little over $53,000 on a C3PAO for a mock audit and C3PAO certification assessment. In the next 18 months, this company spent literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of prepping documents and policies and adding tools. And then that C3PAO came in for a mock audit and failed them in the first 2 hours. So here's what happened. Their policies and procedures were written to the control level, not down to the objective level. So like Bob was mentioning, each control may have 5, 6 objectives. You have to hit all of them. It's all or none for the point system. The other big component, their secure enclave was not properly scoped. Charlie's going to spend some time talking about this. This is a huge component. And this, Josh, you might chime in, I mean, this is you. This is where CUI flowed into their current ERP, which was not FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. So in that scoping, we started identifying areas where CUI was getting outside of their boundaries. Their system security plan documentation was vague and encompassed the entire company and not the specific enclave. The challenge here, guys, is not the effort. This company has put in hundreds of hours of effort. The problem was they literally started in the wrong place. And when you start in the wrong place, you end up definitely in the wrong place. And that's where this is becoming a reoccurring theme out talking to clients on a daily basis.
Thank you, Jason. Some quick info about us. We've been around since the 60s. We were not doing cybersecurity back in the 60s. We're not the government or the Army, but we were founded by Mrs. Susan Elliott. You see her picture there. She's still with us today. She's a phenomenal lady and entrepreneur. We started out as a training services organization. And then with the advent of the PC in the 80s, really became involved in helping small and mid-sized businesses set up their network infrastructure and train their employees on this emerging technology. As that developed into the 90s and 2000s, we developed expertise in IT services and became an MSP and MSSP. In 2009, we became a Department of Defense contractor ourselves, and that's where we really started to establish our cybersecurity expertise around compliance with these evolving regulations. We're a little bit different than your normal MSSP in that we also have a QMS in place, and we are ISO as well. Not often that you see that term in technology spaces. And as I mentioned earlier, forgive the humble brag, but we are proud of it. We were one of the very early companies to get CMMC Level 2 certification, doing so back in November of 2024 as part of the early Joint Surveillance Audit Program. A little bit more about some of our technological expertise. We are an RPO, a registered provider organization with the Cyber AB. We have been NIST 800-171 compliant since 2017. We've been NIST 853 compliant, dealing with classified systems, since 2009. And we are in the process of becoming a C3PAO ourselves. So we're also going to be one of the organizations that does the certification to CMMC. We can't do that same thing for the client. If we help you get ready for certification, we then cannot do your certification assessment. But we're able to help organizations that either need help getting ready or have done that work themselves or worked with a different RPO and need certification. So we're very proud of the work that we put in developing our DoD expertise and the certifications that our team does hold, and bringing that to help our clients and meet them no matter where they are in their certification journey. So what does that journey look like? Really, this is and there's an easy button at the end, but none of this is necessarily, quote, easy. But it can become much easier, as Jason noted, if you're starting from the right place and you're not skipping any steps. The key aspect of all of this, from getting started, and I'm going to ask Charlie to talk about this on the next slide, is scoping. Really understanding what is your system boundary that is going to be in scope, needing to be certified. Does that include an ERP? How are you receiving, storing, and transmitting the information that needs to be protected to these requirements? Validating that with some form of a gap assessment, whether doing so internally, if you have the right expertise, or bringing in an RPO to assist you, remediating any gaps, ensuring that you have the systems in place to monitor and maintain compliance. With CMMC and these requirements, compliance is not a one-time snapshot. It needs to be an ongoing, steady state. Charlie, do you want to spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about scoping and the critical role that that plays in an organization's journey towards compliance?
Absolutely. Got some questions to answer. So first, what level? That's going to be found in your contracts. You're going to have different clauses for each one of those. There's the FAR clause and the DFARS clause. I can't rattle off the FAR clause off the top of my head, but I can rattle off the DFARS clause. Lots of numbers. We're going to have this later in the presentation, so I don't have to do that right now. But you're going to look for what's in those contracts, whichever one is the highest level. So if you have the DFARS clause, that means you need to meet level 1 and level 2. If it's just FAR, you only have to meet level 1, which is 15 controls, 15 objectives. A little bit easier to accomplish. So once you understand what's in your contracts, now you can say, okay, well, now I can define my scope. How do I do that? The best way to do it is to develop a data flow diagram. How do you receive what you have to make or create? So are you getting documents from your prime, whoever that contract is with? Are they making you go to portals and download those? Okay, well, who does that? Is that sales? Is that Is it engineering? Does it go straight to engineering? Okay, well, now engineering has to make changes to those. Okay, what you're going to try and figure out is get the right people in the room to follow the CUI from when it enters your organization to production. And if there are changes that go back out to subcontractors, if you have subs underneath you, all that has to be defined in that data flow diagrams. Okay, so that's going to be able to say, okay, now I see it goes into this system. Oh, I didn't realize it went to this cloud system. I need to make sure that's in scope. So that's going to bring up some questions around flow. Are those the things that need to necessarily stay the same, or can you make process changes to minimize your scope and have an enclave? So after seeing that, then you can say, okay, well, now I've got my internal part of this. I've talked about subcontractors. I have a support system. We're using an MSSP. Do they have access to that CUI? Okay, well, what does their compliance state look like? Are they managing tools for us? Do we have cloud service providers that are managing tools for us? Do they have what's called a customer responsibility matrix that says what they manage versus what we're supposed to manage? That is going to be required for your certification as well. And then finally, all of that's going to tie into that system security plan we touched on earlier. I like to call it like the Cliff Notes for your security system. So that's just going to be reading through those 110 controls, those 320 objectives, and it's going to say, hey, for this objective, if you want to see how it's implemented here. And then the assessor can easily be able to pivot and see where to go. But all of that goes into understanding and defining what that scope is in the end. So very important. Don't want to have those false starts like with the sample company we showed earlier. A rework. If you go into an assessment and maybe you don't have some controls that are met and they're able to be brought out as POAMs, they're going to have to be reassessed after they're fixed after 180 days. So that's going to be potentially more cost. So in the end, doing it right the first time and spending the time on the scoping is very crucial.
And Charlie, I wanted to make a quick comment, and I'm not sure if you could add some color to this as well. But Infor has a strategy where they put the entire ERP and their document management and their tech layer, their integration layer, it's all hosted in a FedRAMP authorized. It's already on the FedRAMP marketplace and it's been there since 2017. How does that affect or simplify the scope if they can get a certification or a letter saying their entire ERP is protected in a GovCloud environment that's, at AWS GovCloud? How does that help or simplify the scope?
It does help. It does help. So remember I mentioned something about a customer responsibility matrix. Those cloud service providers are going to have that matrix, okay? According to CMMC. Some of them actually might be for FedRAMP, so they may be to the NIST 800-53 moderate standard. It's 325 controls, but they're mapping to NIST 800-171, which matters for CMMC level 2. Once that's provided, it will say what controls you inherit. So I shouldn't say just controls and objectives. So let's say that you have that ERP system out there and it's inheriting 84 controls. So now that means you don't have to do all 110 controls. You're going to be responsible, obviously, for policy, procedure, documentation. That's really not going to change. But the technical implementations are going to go from a large list like this to this. So that definitely can simplify your implementation plan and bring you just to that certification stage a lot quicker.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. So in preparing for certification, it's important to vet that out, right? A gap assessment. If you were to have an RPO come in and do a gap assessment of your environment, if it's level 1, they're going to be looking at 15 controls, 59 objectives. But let's talk about level 2, 110 controls, 320 objectives. We talked about perception and reality that you see over on the right. That's where, and like Charlie and his team would be like, okay, you're using, info for your ERP. Let's take a look at that. Get a copy of their responsibility matrix. Let's make sure that's meeting the requirements. Validate they're in the FedRAMP marketplace, etc. All of that you've just defined in scoping now gets validated. As you go through control by control, objective by objective, this is how an organization should be. This is how we do it. Would be documenting those things for every single control. Here you can see one for configuration management. It's going to talk about the control. It's going to say, was the information or was the control met, not met, partially met, and then it's going to have details again down to that objective level. This document, it's usually 60 to 80 pages long, depending upon how much evidence an organization has to support meeting these requirements. This can be used for your system security plan or can be used to update your existing SSP. For any requirement that is not met or partially met, there will be a POAM created, or now an operational plan of action, because the DoD likes to change acronyms and create new ones from time to time. So this will give you, think about your literal to-do list of what needs to be done in order to remediate items that aren't fully meeting compliance and check them off as you move forward through your certification. Why is this important? This is going to flag what are 5-point controls, what are 3-point controls. You know, if you have any 5-pointers or 3-pointers, forget about it. You're not going to pass a C3PAO certification audit. You won't even be allowed to submit a self-assessment into SPRS if any of those 5-pointers or 3-pointers are not fully met. So understanding it down to this level of detail is critical, so you know how much time you need to remediate what you have left and weigh that against how much time you have versus where your contract may be in the rollout or what your primes are telling you. From there, and this slide is a little bit self-serving, but it's going to be important to any organization. How do you go about remediating those things? Well, these requirements are more than just IT and technology. About 2/3 of them are technical in nature, but they're going to deal with everything to how visitors are escorted through your building, how you onboard, offboard employees. So think about policy and procedure just as much as you think about technology. Yes, you need to make sure that your IT tools or the partner from which you're getting those tools are able to withstand a certification audit, of course. But also, are you going to have the policy and procedure documentation that show how that control is being met on an ongoing, continuing basis? So you really have to have that boiled down to the detail. So for a lot of organizations, it could be a solution set that is certain tools of a technology stack, a mix of policy and procedure documentation, customizing that to an environment, and then some group policy objects that may need to be applied across the organization, or at least to that subset or enclave that is within the scope of these requirements. So this can be a highly customized step because it's not necessarily about boiling the ocean and applying all of these controls across your entire environment. Again, it's going back to that scoping. What is needed and where, and how do we implement these things without disrupting the operations of our organization? Lastly, not only do you need to do that, you need to ensure that it's being done and maintained on an ongoing basis. So there is one control, I'm going to let Charlie speak to it on these next few slides, that deals with continuous monitoring, or CONMON, as we have affectionately termed it around here.
So inside of the security assessment domain, there is a single control, CA.L2-3.12.3. You have to effectively assess controls on a continuous basis to make sure that they're in continuous compliance, okay? So there are 110 controls. That means that I have to continuously monitor them at some type of schedule or cadence. So first of all, you'll have to think about, okay, well, I need to understand what is that schedule going to be like, and weighting the controls, understanding that maybe I need to look at this one more often than another. So coming up with that schedule. Once that schedule is filled out, now you've got, or is completed, now you have to go ahead and actually do the actual investigation. So it's pulling evidence, making sure that if you're configuring a tool to work a certain way in order to meet requirements, obviously, IT support happens, people do things. It can come out of compliance. Somebody forgets to check a checkbox when they're doing maintenance. It happens. This catches that prior to you going into a certification assessment or doing your internal self-assessments. Obviously, once you become certified, you have to do an attestation every year to make sure you're in compliance between the 3-year periods of certification. So it's going to address those issues. And I'm going to give a real world example. And Bob, I'm going to pick on you. Not that you've done this, but just because you're on here. So multi-factor authentication, there is a control around multi-factor authentication, okay? And there's certain things that have to be met, if you're a privileged user or if you're a non-privileged user. So Bob, in this case, is a non-privileged user. He cannot log into his VPN properly. Something's going on with it. And MFA is part of that VPN process. So when he connects to the VPN, it brings up a pop-up. He puts his password in, hits enter, and it's supposed to send something to his phone and does, and he connects. But he just can't connect at all. So he asks if somebody can test it. So obviously IT starts testing it. And one of the things they say is we're going to turn off multi-factor authentication for now so you can log in a VPN. So they fix the issue, okay? But they forget to re-enable multi-factor authentication for Bob himself. Bob doesn't have to get his phone out anymore to be able to, hit yes and whatnot. It's just, I connect, it's easy, great. So if we were not doing continuous monitoring, a year goes by, and now it's time for your certification assessment. During the assessment, it's found that multi-factor authentication is not enabled for Bob. That is a control. It's a differently way to control. You can get partial credit for that one. It's worth either 3 or 5 points. You can have everything else perfect, but you just failed your audit because of that one setting not being checked, okay, for Bob. So yeah, this is where that continuous monitoring comes into play. It helps to find those issues, root them out, and remediate them. So part of what SSE does is we take that on for you for those IT controls. So we go through and we create that schedule for you. We go ahead and give you reporting on, hey, we're finding that, there was an issue here. We resolved the problem. And if there's something that keeps repeatedly happening, hey, it looks like this is continuing to be an issue because, you've got people that are, part-time employees, and you say you're going to disable employees' accounts in 30 days, but they're gone for 90 days at a time, and we're continuously remediating this. Do we need to put a plan of action milestone document together for this one control to maybe push that out a little bit in order for this control to stop coming out of compliance? Those are the things that are going to be found throughout our process.
Thank you, Charlie. And we bring that to you in part of how we would work with a client if we're outsourced. Charlie and his team provide that vCISO consulting. So those monthly, quarterly, annual Kanban reports are shared. There are going to be some things that you can't outsource, right? The physical security at your building, for example, visitor logs, things of that nature. So there is still very much the client ownership of their security program as it relates to these things. But it's a collaborative approach, and again, one that is designed to ensure ongoing continuous compliance with these requirements. So what happens if you're not meeting them? What are some of the risks? There are internal and external risks. Let's talk about internal first. Think about, do you have the internal resources with the expertise to understand these requirements? Again, down to that objective level. Then think about, do they have the time to deal with this? Everybody has day jobs, right? In addition to trying to do these things. But then also think about your other teams, HR, legal, facilities, etc., that are going to come into scope versus what these requirements touch. So this is more than just something you can hand to the IT guy. They often get tasked with this. And don't get me wrong, they will be heavily involved, but it is broader than that. This is something that really needs to be taken on at the C level. Externally, and this relates to ESPs, external service providers, CSPs, cloud service providers, and MSPs, managed service providers. You need to be asking your partners and your providers, do your cloud or tools, environments, etc., meet FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalency requirements? Both Charlie and Josh touched on that earlier. Does your IT hardware meet all CMMC requirements, including FIPS validated cryptography? This could be everything from switches that you may have throughout your facility, as well as even the wireless access points. If CUI, controlled unclassified information, is transmitting through those, they are in scope. They need to have FIPS validated cryptography. So with all that, would you pass a CMMC certification assessment? Would your partners be able to pass it? If not, would they at least be able to support you during that certification audit? Could they come in and speak to the antivirus tool that they're providing for you and whether or not it has AI components? And if those go up to a cloud for analysis, is that cloud in a FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent environment? All of those things are going to come into play during that certification assessment. It's best to ask those questions now versus being surprised at the 11th hour.
And Bob, if I may, if you just for
Yep.
one quick second go back to that slide, where we were talking about FedRAMP and FIPS. What matters is it's around, when you're talking about that scoping, it's wherever the CUI is stored, processed, or transmitted. So if you're using a system to protect your environment, but no CUI is ingested into it, that is a different type of asset that is identified in scoping. It doesn't have to be FedRAMP. So that's where that scoping gets even more important, because then you can just follow the CUI and to understand, okay, well, in these systems, it has to be FedRAMP. It has to be transmitted with FIPS. But these other systems don't need to be FedRAMP. So don't think that every single cloud tool that you need to get has to be FedRAMP. It's really just around that storing, processing, transmitting of the CUI. I just wanted to make that point. Sorry.
No, it's a great point. Thank you, Charlie. Those are the three key verbs: stored, processed, transmitting. Um, But beyond internal and external, to continue with being Mr. Happy Fun Guy, yes, there are legal risks. These are real. There is False Claims Act exposure that is framed in the 7021 contract language. Specifically, as a condition of contract award, current CMMC certification at the appropriate level is required. There is affirmation of current compliance by an affirming official. So think about this. You go through your certification audit with a C3PAO. You pass, you get a 110, you're certified. On an annual basis, until that 3-year certification needs to be renewed, and you need to go through another assessment with a C3PAO, on an annual basis, a senior company official, your president, your COO, your CFO, someone will need to go out into SPURS and attest and affirm that you are still meeting all of those requirements. So there is legal risk in doing that on an annual basis, whereas something may have changed, whereas something may have happened that causes you to have a different scope and it's no longer meeting requirements. So it's something organizations need to be mindful, and it's why that continuous monitoring is critical to ensure the ongoing compliance state, because you do need to affirm it on an annual basis. In conjunction with DoD establishing and implementing the CMMC program, the Department of Justice back in 2022 established a cyber fraud initially, specifically to utilize the False Claims Act to go after companies that were knowingly or unknowingly misrepresenting their compliance status. So think about it. What we shared about our gap assessments, right? A company has a score on record with the government. Let's say they put in a score of 110. The reality is their score is 133 points lower than that. They've been executing on a government contract all that time. What we're seeing now are whistleblowers are speaking up, and they're getting money as part of these settlements with the DOJ. If you do nothing else from this webinar, Google US versus Morse Corp. It's there in bold, the second example on the screen. That was an organization that had misrepresented, whether knowing or unknowing, their compliance status and settled with DOJ. But it reads to a lot of specifics that many organizations, if they're looking in a mirror, could say, I wonder if we have that here. I wonder if we have that here. We need to double check this. We need to be certain of this, because there is real risk in what DoD and DOJ are doing in relation to companies and what they have attested to for their compliance status and False Claims Act exposure. Good rule of thumb, anything you're submitting is a certification of truth. Your SPURS score submissions, whether it's previously NIST 800-171 or CMMC, having an SSP is required. So if you're an organization and you submitted a SPURS score back in 2021 or 2022 and you don't have an SSP, one of the requirements is that an organization has an SSP. It is the foundation on which that SPURS score is based, and the absence of an SSP means that that submission is invalid and the company is not in compliance. So by the very nature of the requirements, a score without the documentation means it's invalid. If you're in that situation and you've been executing on contracts during that time, there could be potential risk in the slides that we mentioned and the actions that the government has been taking. Again, you are attesting to compliance, no longer working towards it. So if you take only one slide home, this is the one. Certification, 3 to 6 month journey. That's if you're prepared and motivated. It's going to be some technological things. Yes, there could also be a lot of policy procedure things, how you're doing business now, making sure those align with and are able to support the compliance requirements. Don't trust any previous self-assessment scoring without documented evidence. Make sure you have that. Make sure you have that down to the control and objective level. If you don't, get an evidence-based assessment. We would suggest talking to some partners that have done this before and are experienced with this. Jason likes to say, choose your RPO like you would choose your surgeon. Experience does matter. Knowing what to look for does matter. Knowing how these controls can be implemented in multiple ways in order to meet and try to align with your business operation, all of that matters. Most companies get it wrong by self-assessing, then buying tools, then writing policies, and then realizing their scope is incorrect. Then they have to start over and spend more. So the best approach starts with that scoping first, yes, with the end in mind, but really establishing what is that boundary. And finally, wrapping up, these are some key questions we would also suggest you take back to your organization. What is the scope of your DoD efforts? Is it FCI? Is it CUI? Is that going to be CMMC level 1 or level 2? Is it enclave wide, or do I need to apply it to the whole enterprise? We see this a lot in manufacturing, right? There may be a large manufacturer, but only 25% of the work they do supports DoD primes. So do they need to boil the ocean and apply these controls everywhere, or can they create an enclave and only apply them to this smaller scoped environment? Sometimes that's possible, sometimes that's not, but those are important conversations to be having. Do I have a current NIST score on record with the government in SPURS? Do I have supporting documentation to validate it? Do I have POAMs? Do I know what my gaps are? What about my current vendors? Who am I using as a cloud provider, an MSP? Do their tools that they have deployed in my environment, where the CUI is, again, being stored, processed, transmitted, do those meet the necessary requirements in order for my organization to pass a certification assessment? If you had to tomorrow to participate in a new award or an existing award, could you submit a self-assessment with a score of 110 and have the appropriate documentation in order to validate it? And then lastly, how much time do you need and how much time do you still have? That's the big question that a lot of organizations struggle with, that an experienced partner can help you start to answer. So with that, I think we wanted to turn it back over to our hosts at Guide, both on the screen as well as Josh and Sharon, and really open it up to any Q&A that anyone may have.
Awesome, Bob. That was Bob and team. That was really good. We've got a couple questions in the Q&A session. So if anybody else has any attendees have questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A session section there on the bottom of the screen. But first one, just in general, as a mid-market manufacturer, what are the key gaps that you guys are seeing in maybe a good way to ask this is where are they off in where their expectation is versus where their gap is? You said there was like a negative 124. Where are you most commonly seeing where they have a wrong assessment of their controls? What are the most common ones you're seeing?
I'm gonna ask Charlie to speak on this. We did a recent webinar where we actually showed these are the 20 most frequently missed requirements. So Charlie dove into the weeds on a lot of this, and he'd be the best one to speak to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I talked about policy documentation. I just want to mention if you had no policy documentation except for your SSP, that your score and everything technically was implemented, your score would go from 110 to a -70. So that policy documentation is very important. I just want to just get that out of the way here. But from a control standpoint, I would say I'm going to go by domain. And the configuration management domain, I think, is where most people struggle. The reason I say that is you've got to configure baseline configurations for your hardware in your environment. So those systems in your environment, you have to come up with a software list. So here is my software baseline. This is software that's going to go on these systems. Those systems, the hardware that I talked about that we use, what's the firmware that's going to be on those? We want to make sure that that's called out. And then once that is all done, you've got your documentation there. Now it's okay. We got the asset inventory. I think a lot of companies see, well, our baseline is our asset inventory, and they don't configure the baselines. They show me, hey, here's our asset inventory. We got this great asset tracking system, shows all the good stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, where's the baselines? Well, that is the baseline. No, what's the machine before it goes into inventory? A lot of people like have an issue like trying to put those two together. They think that they're one and the same. They're not. Then going further into that, because they don't have those baselines, they also don't have their security configuration baselines. So that would be once you have like a workstation now, it's you get it from Dell, you go ahead and put your software on it. But now you have to do hardening. So that's making sure certain services are disabled. We want to put firewall ports and blocking certain things. We want to remove bloatware off of those systems. Those are those security configuration baselines. And because they're not doing the actual first baseline, they're not following up with the second. Change management. A lot of people are making changes to systems, but not taking it through a change management process or a change control process. What's really required is having like almost like a change control board. Basically, changes are submitted, they're reviewed. There's a security impact analysis done to those changes, and then they're either approved or denied. Okay, and most companies are doing that in some sort of practice, but there's no formal documentation, there's no tracking. So, and then on top of that, there's also the software. We talked about software on hardware baselines and figuring out your software list, but you also have to make sure that that's the only software that's able to either be launched or you're blocking anything else from being launched. So you have to have either whitelisting or blacklisting. So people are not actually doing that. They're just saying we're removing admin rights and calling it a day. So configuration management is the domain where most people struggle. I also just want to say, because you guys we're talking to a manufacturing, that scoping I was talking about, there are different kinds of assets, and one of those is a specialized assets. I think that they're looking at their machines on the shop floor and thinking, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to apply these controls to a 10-year-old CNC machine that's running Windows XP? How am I supposed to do that? So CMMC allows you to list those specialized assets, and basically you can only secure them as much as you can. So all 110 controls, maybe you can only do 35 of them to that system. As long as you're putting them in the asset inventory that way, that's great. If you can't encrypt the data that's going to them, you have to have some kind of alternative physical safeguard to secure that data going back and forth to the machine. So there are ways to get to compliance, but really it's that configuration management domain and understanding how to bring those machines on the shop floor into scope.
Awesome. That's some really good information. We have another one on here. If you're just thinking through the lens of compliance training and change management, what are some things you can do to help a company with the knowledge, sharing the knowledge throughout the company about some of the IT, the security teams in pursuit of certification, change management throughout the company on the process here and what you're trying to do for compliance?
Sure. So There is a domain inside of NIST 171, CMMC Level 2, awareness and training. 3 controls there. There's risk-based, role-based risk awareness, role-based training, and then insider threat training. That training program, you're going to have to build that anyway. So part of that is once you're defining the roles in your organization, so those roles that store, process, transmit, CUI, you're going to have to understand and train those users on what to do with that information. It's a perfect delivery way, to doing that annually as a reminder as new hires come on board. They understand and see once you develop your policies and procedures, hey, just to let you know. And I mean, internally at S&C, perfect prime example. So we go through and we call it CMMC Day. So for those new employees, we come in and we do a CMMC overview. We go through the change management process, like mentioning, and we have like a spreadsheet in our quality management system that basically has common questions of things that you may want to change. And if you're going to change these things, you need to submit a change request. So coming up almost with like an FAQ type document was really helpful for us internally because we were not capturing all those changes. We were capturing them after the fact and then updating our documentation. So that really helped. So, and it's something you have to do to meet controls anyway. So once you have your policy procedures defined, going through and training those users on it, and we customize it based on that type of role. So somebody in accounting may not need to understand what someone in IT has to do for change requests. So we specialize that for those different types of users.
Yeah, awesome. We get this one a lot. So Infor being on the FedRAMP marketplace, the FedRAMP authorized, moderate impact level. What is the biggest difference between a FedRAMP authorized and a FedRAMP equivalent solution? I know there's been some
Okay.
controls passed for FedRAMP equivalent, but it seems like a really cloudy answer that we get a lot. So what is the
This is the easy answer.
Yes.
Okay. But so when you're going through FedRAMP authorization, so first thing you've got to do is you've got to go through and you have to meet all 325 controls. I forgot how many injectives it is. It's over 1,000, 1,200 something. I can't remember. So you've got to meet all those. You've got to get your SSP. You've got to get no POAM items. You have to engage with not a C3 PAO, but a 3 PAO. And that 3 PAO is going to guarantee, make sure your attestation is correct. You also have to do monthly penetration tests on that environment. So monthly, not just quarterly, anything like that, monthly penetration tests. And then that once you get to that point, the authorization takes it to the PMO. That's the step that doesn't happen. So with equivalency, and I can attest this because we use a FedRAMP Monitor equivalent storage provider. And what we do is when we have a client or even ourselves, when we did this, when we're going for certification, we contact them and say, we need your current body of evidence. So they have to release their current SSP, their attestation documentations, their POAM list that has nothing in it, and also those pen test reports for the last 2 months. So then that way that can be looked at by the C3PAO to verify compliance. The difference with authorization, besides the cost of going through the PMO to get authorized, that's the big number one difference. Number two, as soon as they see that you're in the FedRAMP marketplace, they don't have to look at that body of evidence. They just say, well, where's the customer responsibility matrix so we can see what you're inheriting from them, and that's it. It's just much easier to work with one that's authorized. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working with one that's equivalent, but there's more back work and more analysis being done by the C3PAO to verify that compliance.
Yeah, and I know that's Infor has put a big emphasis on that because it's a lot of customers in the aerospace and defense industry, especially in the manufacturing space. And this was a big push in the, I think 2017 is when they got their authorization. But it answers a lot of questions that the customers have and those auditors that have. It's a lot easier to just hand over that authorization versus going through all the background and verifying all that stuff. So I guess that was all the questions we had here. I guess one key takeaway, if for everybody that's on here, is this is real. I know CMMC has been around for a long time, but there is teeth to it. The deadlines are real and they're there. It scares me when I talk to a manufacturing company that says, we're kind of in wait and see, the government will extend. I think that just puts you in, it's a really risky position to be in. So it's real and it's here. Us at Guide, we talk about this every day. We're happy to help anybody that has questions. We're not an RPO or a C3PAO. We work with companies like SSE to pull them in. They're the experts, and we would love to help any company that has questions or looking to do a gap assessment or want to start on the right path, so they don't have to do rework. Please reach out to Guide Technologies. We've got our contact information there. We'll send a follow-up email to this, and we're happy to introduce Jason, Bob, and Charlie from the SSE team and pull you guys in for some additional color as well. So, SSE team, thank you so much for jumping on. This has been incredibly valuable, really good content and information. And thank you for all the participants. This will be recorded, and we're happy to send out the recording to anybody that's interested. So, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time and hope you have an awesome afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
Josh.
you, Josh. It's our pleasure.
Thank you all.